So you're certainly correct in the fact that it's a problem, and I would say it's probably reached crisis level. In many different metropolitan areas,
Hmm.
truckers, especially owner operators, are faced with zero option to be able to work their rigs, either overnight or long term. And then as you get into fleet level discussions, there's certainly fleets that do not have a home. And we're seeing that, in large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, a lack of physical locations to place vehicles as you get into the densely populated metropolitan areas is certainly a problem.
Welcome to Stream, a trucktractortrailer.com production. My name is Zach Miller. I'm your host, and I'm really excited about this. You longtime viewers, listeners know that among the many problems that we discuss on this show, at the forefront of them is, of course, the issue of truck parking. This is a nationwide problem, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Mike Landau, who is the CEO of ParkMyFleet.com. Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Zach, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, you guys, a lot of us in the industry are trying to solve this problem, to work on this problem. And you guys, your company, you're there, boots on the ground, actually going about doing it. So I guess if you could just give us the history of the company and sort of, where you sit today in terms of solving this truck parking crisis that we have in this nation.
Sure. So you're certainly correct in the fact that it's a problem, and I would say it's probably reached crisis level. In many different metropolitan areas, truckers, especially owner operators, are faced with zero option to be able to work their rigs, either overnight or long term. And then as you get into fleet level discussions, there's certainly fleets that do not have a home. And we're seeing that, in large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, a lack of physical locations to place vehicles as you get into the densely populated metropolitan areas is certainly a problem. So we were born kind of in the teeth of COVID. My background's in real estate and fintech. We started noticing some anomalies at the height of the pandemic, particularly in how vehicles and goods were moving, and had some initial success actually in the rental car realm, where they were faced with massive infleeting, and then vehicles that were up for remarketing coming off lease were also faced with the problem where dealerships simply didn't have room for them because vehicles weren't selling during the pandemic. And then what it really opened our eyes up to was the fact that parking at scale, the services to manage fleets at scale on a national level, and then the new fuels like EV and hydrogen fuel cell were going to be an issue, not just in a rental car vertical or in the trucking vertical, but pretty much in every major mobility vertical that exists where you're moving goods or people. And that's really where we were kind of born out of. And then from there, we've quickly scaled. So we're live in about 36 cities in the United States now, and continuing to grow, hoping to hit about 50 by the end of 22.
That's incredible. That really is incredible. And it's interesting that you guys really got started and ramped up during the pandemic, because that's also when I think a lot of the legislators started to notice the problem as well. I know that both at the federal level, there's a lot more discussion about truck parking than I personally have seen, in my time in the industry. And here on the local New York City level, you and I are both based in New York City. Pretty much any conversation I have, or that some of the pamphlets I see given out by the local representatives, is about truck parking. And it's always been a problem. I don't want someone who's listening to say, oh, well, truck parking in New York City, it's not a new problem. It's like, no. It's not a new problem. I understand that. But there's a level of understanding about it now that we haven't quite seen before the pandemic. And so that's what I think is interesting.
Sure, and to that point on the federal level, the DOT is certainly taking a look at this. There's other government agencies that are taking a hard look at it as well. The DOE, by example, under Secretary Granholm's leadership, has started to really take a hard look at how are you going to get the required infrastructure to handle the EV transition, the hydrogen transition. So there's a lot of government agencies on the federal level, as well as there was a bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed that doesn't directly address parking, but it certainly addresses the infrastructure that's going to be needed as we move away from ICE vehicles. Now, on the local level in New York City, yes, it's not a new problem at all. And I think it's really going to take public-private partnerships to try to solve it. The government doesn't have, much to the chagrin of, both the elected officials and the industry themselves. It's not like New York City sitting on an abundance of real estate where they could say, hey, we can allocate 25 acres to you. It simply doesn't exist. So, when we talk about public and private partnerships, it's going to take private sector investment as well as public sector involvement from a zoning perspective, by example, to try to alleviate this problem. And, I think that it's going to, looking at how maybe we do things a little differently in bridging mid-mile, last mile, and all the traffic around distribution centers and things of that nature, smart traffic routing, and other things can be a part of the solution. And I'm not espousing to say that I'm the complete solution. There's a shortage that requires, acres and acres of real estate, millions and millions of square feet across the nation to be able to adequately address the issue. But I do think, and we as a company have begun to make inroads in there, that you can, if we're smart about it, we leverage technologies and, like I said, private-public partnerships to try to, get this to a point where it isn't such a problem.
Let me ask you this, and it's so fascinating that you have that real estate background as well. When you go and you try to tie the parking crisis into some of these other issues, like you say, be they distribution centers, be they more efficient vehicles, more efficient routing, does that sort of help push back against some of the NIMBYism? Does that help sort of get some of those zoning changes that might be needed? Because obviously one of the issues with truck parking is that sort of, well, no, I don't want the trucks in my backyard.
Sure. So I certainly think it plays a role in influencing the people, the relevant bodies or the relevant government bodies amongst the zoning boards that, hey, well, you don't want a diesel vehicle that's polluting and is noisy and idles noisily. But if you have a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, or if you have an EV that's nearly silent, in fact, they have to create audio decibels for safety reasons around EV vehicles because they don't really emit sounds. I think that maybe could help change some of the calculus amongst the zoning boards where, hey, we're going to bring clean new mobility to your city, to your county, and here's why it's going to be different. But certainly we're in the infancy of that learning curve amongst the relevant parties.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that sort of when you present what you're doing, it's a new age type of truck stop, because I think, in them, especially in the cities, when these elected officials, when these zoning boards hear truck stop, we know what the image is. That's not exactly what you guys are. And I think a lot of what the work we have as an industry is to change that image and that perception. And I think a lot of the efficiency, environmental, and tech stuff goes a long way to doing that. And I think where you come in is you're at the forefront of all of that, which is a really fascinating place to be as we sort of come out of this pandemic and into this, new, cleaner type of future here.
Certainly, and it is certainly a fascinating place to be, and it allows me to get exposed to a whole slew of new technologies, and I get to learn new things every day about how people are trying to solve this issue. And I don't think that we're the solution, by ourselves.
Right.
I think it's going to take an ecosystem, and that's really what we're trying to assemble is an ecosystem of partners that can help solve this issue. And and yes, it is kind of on the technological forefront of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that if people can learn about that, understand that, and realize that there's the CEO of BlackRock, I believe, said environmentalism in essence is capitalism, and I kind of intend to believe in that, meaning people are going to transition to these new fuels, and you're going to get buy-in from both the relevant government entities as well as the fleets when everything makes economic sense. Right. So just if I'm a fleet owner, if I'm a Class 8 fleet owner and I'm running ICE vehicles right now, and I'm managing thousands of parts, and I have to worry about, especially where fuel costs have gone here recently, that's a major pain point for me, right? Managing all those SKUs of parts and keeping my vehicles running. Everybody that's listening is familiar to the Class 8 breakdown rates. And if, when you run an EV fleet, there's hundreds of parts, not thousands of parts, and less fluids, right? There's still brake fluid, but you're not worrying about engine lubricants and other factors that are both costly and play into the maintenance part. And then you'll save by and large 30% on your fuel costs if you do transition to EV. So again, there's strong reasoning behind it in trying to make that happen. So what you're getting is the transition to more environmentally friendly and sound efficient, non-polluting, and everything that would go into changing the calculus of a zoning board also makes business sense, in my opinion, to the fleet owner, because you're going to literally save thousands on your upkeep expense and on your fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something where there's been that disconnect between industry and, if you want to call it, legislative / regulatory bodies, in that it's the totality of the cost. And it's also the totality of what's missing, which is, in some cases, truck parking, where fleets might have serious difficulty in moving freight because there's no place for their drivers to safely park. And if this is all tied in together, now all of a sudden they're starting to see some real incentives and some real cost savings. And to your point, it's not even, it's just straight business, and it's straight business sense to go ahead and get this stuff done.
Yeah, and then there's things that you could look at, that further delve into the savings aspect of it, right? So if we're looking at, can I create a virtual model of my vehicle, right? And utilize data analytics for route optimization, and then maybe get, with our hub model, if you can kind of coalesce resources at a specific location, right? So, the vehicle, it doesn't have to remain there necessarily idly. Maybe you can put it out again in a second shift and start thinking about, other smarter data-driven ways to be able to, route optimize and asset optimize, so that, and when you're looking at battery capacity and duty cycles and everything that surrounds that, you get into a situation where you're going to recognize further economies of scale and efficiencies from moving into these newer types of fleets.
The fleets that you are partnered with are, for the most part, more of these forward-thinking, forward-looking type fleets, right? Do they? So I guess what I'm getting at is, do they sort of open their information up to you and say, hey, we're tracking this, we're monitoring this, we can tell you this is where our savings are, or it's just a little too early in that process?
No, I'd say that there's a lot of transparency between us and our clients. And, we work with national clients. We also do some work with some regional ones as well. and they're certainly sharing the data. And they are certainly being collaborative with us to be able to, I don't have all the answers, they don't have all the answers, but I think that together we can delve into those. So, and this is new territory for everybody. So the more open source type data that we can share, both, with ourselves, is going to help us recognize efficiencies. So if I know that my client's going to run X amount of routes, and I import that into an analytics tool, that'll help me locate my hub in the most efficacious location possible to facilitate their need to save, fuel and cost. And just because you transition to EV doesn't mean that fuel is free, right? You still have to, there's a cost associated with the electricity. So everything to do with getting that route and asset optimization is something that, we're going to pull together a lot of different parties. There are legacy companies that are really good at doing things like telematics. And there are new companies that have emerged that are really good at doing things like statistical regressions on raw data sets to really find out where those efficiencies emerge.
Absolutely. How many of your facilities right now are equipped for EV charging?
So about 10% right now.
Which is pretty good. I mean, given everything, that's pretty good.
And I appreciate that. We certainly have a lot of work to do there. The reason it's at 10% is because we're seeing supply chain issues that are slowing the transition, meaning there's a willingness among at least my customer base to electrify their fleets. They want to, they've made public commitments to doing it. And it's a supply chain issue in terms of the sourcing of vehicles. And, that goes all the way down and up the supply chain.
And what about hydrogen? Do you have hydrogen fueling, or you just sort of service vehicles that run hydrogen?
So we service vehicles that are doing, we have CNG refueling ops on our sites right now. Hydrogen, there just hasn't been a customer demand yet, but I foresee it happening, and we foresee creating both electric and hydrogen corridors along, the north-south and east-west interstates on our locations. So, and there does exist a physics issue in Class 8 where there's battery capacity versus battery weight versus the load that you're trying to carry that I don't believe has been solved yet, that you just simply don't have the physics, energy, weight times mass, and all of the physics calculations that go into that make it difficult to kind of resolve. So I think hydrogen is going to play a big role in that, especially as you're talking about over the road long haul.
Yep. Completely agree.
And we'd like to facilitate that. And then we've got some stuff that's still kind of confidential that has to do with on-site power generation in hydrogen. Because one of the other things is, even if you had municipal buy-in, you need to get utility buy-in too, and that's increasingly difficult, from a resource perspective. So we're looking at ways to try to enhance the grid rather than draw from it and be a tax on the grid. We want to be an energy generator as opposed to an energy expender. So we've got some cool stuff that we're working on there.
Everything you said, I mean, I think that one of the main points you really made is about how these partnerships are so important, and about how, public-private needs to work together. Everything you said, I've also heard from some large fleets that run over the road about some of their concerns, what they'd like to see. And in terms of the legitimate goals that we all have as a society to reduce emissions, to improve the air quality, to improve efficiency, it's not just going to be, we're going to snap our fingers and it's going to be electric. There are going to be some different options available and necessary. And I think you really hit the nail on the head for all of them. So I do have to ask, though, it's a two-part question. One, do you have openings in your facilities? And two, if a fleet is interested in a lease, how would they go about getting in touch with you?
Sure. So we absolutely do have openings in capacity, although, that changes on a daily basis.
Mhm.
We fill up, then vehicles come in, vehicles go out. We maintain the full life cycle of the vehicle from the time that it's dispatched from the OEM to when it completes its duty cycle and is then remarketed. So, so to provide an end-to-end solution. And then we don't really work. So yes, we do have capacity. We don't really work on a lease basis. We kind of work on a national basis. So people come to us and say, hey, I've got 3,000 vehicles and they need to be in these 30 cities. And then we kind of come back to them with solutions. And then for smaller fleets, we also have solutions where if they're more regional or, hey, I've got 200 vehicles and I need to be in 20 cities, we've got solutions for that too. And that's really what we're all about. We try to, well, a small fleet or maybe even a large fleet might not have the critical mass to create a hub like we're creating. If we bring together a bunch of different people that need that solution, well, then we're sharing the costs on infrastructure and we're reducing unit economics and recognizing efficiencies across the board. So, that's really what we're trying to do. And we welcome new business. We have capacity and we would love to accommodate, fleets, small and large.
Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks so much for what you're doing. It really is one of the biggest problems that needs to be solved in trucking right now. And you and your team are doing such a great work on it. And it's so very much appreciated.
I really appreciate you having me, Zach. It's been awesome to be here. Certainly an insightful podcast. And even larger than that, it's certainly a very interesting platform and a necessary platform that you guys run. And I appreciate everything that you guys do in helping educate the people that keep this nation moving, literally, about the new beginnings and new things that are going on. So it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. If you like the content you see, please be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on stream.